Hi everybody, it's Mr. Y. It's Mr. Y Reads. I'm back again. And we're on chapter 37. Sorry. Okay. Sirens began to wail around the Axa base. Lucky saw skyhawks taking off, shields going up, artillery locking onto the black ships in the sky. He saw troopers scramble into action, and now the first bombs began to fall as the shadow ships sent down their deadly rain. Blam! The Axa gunners sent great streams of cannon fire back at their enemies. They hit a shadow ship full on, crippling its shields, making it glow brighter and brighter, until the black ship exploded and the Axa roar of triumph went up into the sky. But Lucky just stared in horror at the destruction erupting all around him. He could hear the screams of dying people on the wind. He could smell burning flesh and metal. It was like that Skyhawk pilot he'd sensed in the astrolabe. He felt nothing but sorrow as life after life was snuffed out. His father strode out of the cabin. If he was surprised by the appearance of the human fleet or afraid of them, he did not show it. He was proud and straight-backed, a leader utterly certain of his purpose, even now. "My son," he said, "tell me you will destroy them." Helpless, hopeless, Lucky shook his head. His father's eyes burned. "How many of us must die before you do your duty?" he said, and with that he stormed away to command his forces. "People of the stars," he cried, "stand and fight! This is our chance to finish the humans forever." Lucky stood there by the cabin, Frolics and Bixer by his side. A blast of ice whipped into their faces. The blizzard was rising again. It was blowing like the end of the world. Frolics' words cut through the wind. "Lucky," he said, "we're still with you. We'll back you up. We'll follow you to the end of the world. But this is it. You need to decide. What are you going to do with your power? How are we going to save the stars?" Lucky's scalp tingled. The stars. Surely they knew what he was meant to do. He concentrated, trying to reach for the stars in his mind, but he couldn't hear them over the explosions. He couldn't feel them through the blaze of battle. He needed to go up, above and beyond the battle. He needed to get away from all this destruction, to see them clearly once again. He looked at the ice mountain. He couldn't even see its summit from here, but he felt drawn to it. "What is it?" said Frolics, as Mystica and Nox joined them outside the cabin. "I have to go up," Lucky said, staring at the slopes. "I have to see the stars." "Of course he does," breathed Mystica hoarsely. "And we have to get him there." She still looked pale and weak, but there was a little life in her yet. Lucky clung on to hope. Maybe she's going to make it after all. If I can just get close enough to the stars, maybe I'll find a way to save us all. "Let's go then," he said. "One last climb." His boots crunched in the snow as he took his first steps up the mountain. Bazooka lit the way, perched on his shoulder. Bixer climbed beside him. Frolics was on the other side, carrying Mystica. Captain Nox refused to be carried. He was strong enough now to climb on his own. It wasn't too steep at first, but it grew steadily steeper and more slippery. The wind whipped and ripped and lashed his skin, but he kept moving up through the snow and rock. Below him, above him, the war raged on. Even here on the mountain slopes, the wind was thick with smoke and the ground shook with explosions as the two great forces threw everything they had at each other. The whole world seemed to be on fire. "It doesn't have to be like this," thought Lucky. "There could be peace. But instead they'll fight and fight until there's nothing left. Nothing left at all." He kept climbing. The mountain got steeper. The higher he climbed, it became hard to get a grip on the frozen snow. His feet kept sliding and slipping beneath him. Even with his hooves powering him up, his legs kept giving way. Each time he slipped, he put out his hand to catch himself and ripped his palms on sharp-edged ice. His friends weren't faring much better. It was a struggle for them all, but higher and higher they climbed, though they kept falling back a step for every two they took. The first shadow ships were now landing at the foot of the mountain. Human forces swarmed out from them and engaged the Axa in combat. President Thorntree herself was commanding them, clad in battle armour. King Theobroma met them head-on with his Axa troopers, but there were more shadow guards landing all the time. They began to force the Axa back, gaining ground through sheer brute force. The king started to retreat up the mountain slope in the same direction Lucky was going, towards the top. Lucky kept climbing. Breathing was getting harder. His lungs felt small and shriveled. His breath came out in crystal clouds. The moisture in his eyes was freezing. Solid chunks of ice were forming on his eyebrows, his eyelashes big as coins. His hands were numb with cold and aflame with pain, all at the same time. All he wanted to do was lie down in the snow, lie down and rest. But, flash! "Keep going!" cried Bixa as the supernova blazed in the sky and Mystic arrived in pain. "Keep climbing! Aquarius could die any time." Lucky hauled himself up another step. It was a huge effort straining up that icy slope into the white fog. Even with Bazooka lighting the way, he still couldn't see the mountain top. There was no way of knowing how far away it was, or if they'd ever make it. Yet he felt certain that was where he had to be. Below him on the mountainside, more and more people were climbing upwards, their figures reduced to ghostly shadows by the blizzard and the fog of war. Shots rang out, but his friends were guarding the rear now, shielding him again, just to give him a chance to make it to the top and see the stars once more. He was bent double, pulling himself towards the summit, one back-breaking step at a time. And then he had to go down on his hands and knees, just to haul himself a little bit closer to the top. And closer. Until finally, with hands torn and bloody from the ice, his fingers touched flat ground, and he hauled himself up onto a plateau. They'd reached the summit of the mountain, the highest point on Charon. Shards of ice and frozen stone lay all around. It was utterly barren and lifeless. Bix and Frolics stood beside him on the summit. Despite the freezing cold, Frolics took off his coat and laid Mystica gently down on it. The captain lay by her side. Below them, not far from the mountain top, King Theobroma and President Thorntree were commanding their forces, locked in deadly battle, climbing higher, all the time. Lucky looked up. The stars were visible at last, but only as points of darkness, black against a bone-white sky, like eye holes in a skull. "So what is it?" he called up at them, pleading. "What am I here for? What am I supposed to do?" And from the stars, there was no reply. Aquarius hung like a cracked jewel in space. The connections that held it together had been ripping apart by the star burner. It was a pitiful and terrifying sight. Flash! The dying star convulsed once again, and Mystica doubled up in agony on the ground. Bixa reached down to her grandmother. "Mystica, are you okay?" The old lady shook her head, exhausted. Her eyes were losing their golden colour. They were fading like a sun going out. "The power will pass to you now, Bixa," she whispered. "Use it wisely. I've always been proud of you, my dearest. You know that, don't you?" Bixa's eyes were wet. She took her grandmother's hand. "Mystica, please, hang on. You can't leave us." Mystica tried to hold on to her. She gripped Bixa with pale fingers, gripped her tight, and then her fingers trembled, and her grip slipped, and her fingers curled away, and she was gone. It was that simple, that stark. It was as if something left her body and was gone. Whatever it was that made her Mystica, whatever the source of her power and her life, it was gone. There was nothing left in its place. Nothing but a cold, dead, lifeless body, curled up on the ground. "No," begged Bixa, tears streaming down her face. "Come back, Mystica, but please don't die." Beside her, Lucky felt his own face crumple, because they couldn't save her. For all his power, for all Bixa's, for all that they loved the old lady and would have done anything for her, they couldn't save her at the end. Bixa was wailing, "No, no, no." But she knew it too. Mystica was dead. Flash! And in the sky above, with one last scream of supernova light, her star died with her. Its massive body began to implode. It was folding in on itself, collapsing. As it collapsed, its final blast of light seemed to curve round and bend back into the broken heart of the star. Aquarius was sucking its own light back in and becoming a black hole. And that's the end of chapter 37. So, Mystica has passed now. I had my suspicions that she may die, but I didn't think Aquarius was gonna die. I thought Mystica might survive it. I know a few of you, Mystica was actually your favourite character, and that was quite a sad moment to see Mystica go there. I can only see one way out of this. I don't want to say anything just in case I'm right and I spoil it for you guys. But yeah, if you do want to leave what you think might happen in the comments, feel free. Thank you once again for tuning in. I've been Mr. Y. This has been Mr. Y Reads. It's my baby who's not using her dummy properly. Stay safe.